show you guys, despite the screaming children outside of my apartment, I want to show you guys how to do a Kitchener, aka grafting stitch. So I've got this swatch here that I've got this zoomed in for future use in this video, but I've got this swatch that, as you can see, has stitches, workable stitches on both ends. I've got both the stitches on 2 knitting needles with the pointy ends facing the same direction. So if you're using this grafting or a Kitchener stitch that I'm about to show you to join something into a loop like a cowl, that's what I've designed a lot of patterns that use cowls that have this grafted or Kitchener stitch join to make it go into a circle. You can also just use this to join 2 swatches that have what's called live stitches, aka loops that you can knit into. This is how you can join those invisibly, or as invisibly as you can. So the Kitchener stitch, I've seen mostly photograph tutorials for it when I was learning, and I feel like video is just a little better of a way to teach it, and I even got a request for this. So here is how to do the Kitchener stitch. You've got your needles held parallel with a long tail of yarn on a tapestry needle. I use this blue needle and my blue nail polish, so hopefully you can see what's going on. Oh yeah, and both needles have the same number of stitches on them, in this case 10. So what you're going to do is hold your needles parallel and do 2 setup stitches. You'll just do these 2 setup stitches one time at the very beginning of your Kitchener or grafting stitch. So what you're going to do is use your sewing needle to sew through the first loop on the knitting needle closest to you, and bring that through that first loop as if to purl, also called purlwise. So sew that tail through that first loop purlwise, leaving the loop on the needle, okay? Then bring your yarn over here to the back needle, the needle farthest from you, and bring your sewing needle through the first loop knitwise, or as if to knit. Draw the tail through and leave it on the needle. So those are the 2 setup stitches. We drew the tail through purlwise once, leaving that loop on the needle closest to us, knitwise once through the first loop on the back needle, leaving both loops on the needles and drawing the tail through. Now for the rest of this stitch, you're going to be doing the same set of actions all the way to the end of your row. And those, the way to remember what you're doing is knit, purl, purl, knit. KP, PK. I almost said N because when you say knit it sounds like it has an N. Anyway, I digress. So you will, on the needle closest to you, draw your sewing needle through that first loop again, but this time do it knitwise and slide that loop off the end of the needle closest to you. So we put the needle in knitwise and slid the loop off, drawing the tail of the yarn through. Then on the second stitch, on that same needle closest to you, draw the tail through that second loop purlwise, leaving it on the needle, just like we did in the setup stitch. All right? Then we go to the needle farthest from you and we draw the yarn through the first loop purlwise, slipping the first loop off the needle, off the back needle. And you'll notice this tail kind of slides between the needles that you're holding parallel to each other and the work you're slipping off the ends. So that was purl, slipping the first loop off the back needle, then draw the sewing needle through the second loop on the back needle knitwise and pull the tail through. Now we'll just look at our loops and we'll see that there are 3, 6, 9 loops on each needle, which is exactly what we want because we've slipped the first loop off of both needles. And now we're just going to keep doing that all the way down. So we're going to do knit through that first loop, slipping it off the end. Draw the tail through this next loop on the needle closest to you, purlwise. Bring the yarn to the back and we will purl, slipping that first loop off the back needle, and then we draw the tail through the second loop on the back needle knitwise. So remember, it is knit and slip, purl, leaving the loop on the needle, purl and slip, and knit, leaving that loop on the needle. And as you go, you're going to want to draw the tail through because the stitches you're making are going to be looking like the knit stitches around them, but you want them to be the same tension or tightness as the rest of your knitting so it's more invisible. I'll do more on that later. So again, knit and slip, purl, and leave that loop on, purl and slip, knit, knit, purl, purl and slip, knit. There are just 2 loops left on these last needles, but luckily, instead of doing knit, purl, purl, knit, we just do just the knit and slip, and then there's nothing to purl on that first needle, and then purl and slip because there's nothing to knit on the back needle. So now if you look, again, I was talking while doing this, but I mentioned that if you straighten everything out, if you pull the tail through at the tension at which you knit the rest of your piece, this can be totally invisible. One trick that I almost always end up doing when I graft 2 pieces of knitting together is that I will use my tapestry needle if there's like a really big stitch or a really crooked stitch to just even out how they lay. I even do this in my regular knitting because I don't have the best tension in the world for a knitter. Sometimes I will just use my knitting needle or a tapestry needle to just pick my stitches a little more evenly, especially if they're like this one that's extra big. But I mean, even in this kind of crappy, quickly done example, I have successfully knit this into a tube with no seams. I mean, there's garter stitch, so a seam would be hard to pick out. But with no actual seams, just this grafting or Kitchener stitch join. So you can see how this would be really awesome for making cowls, or I've used this for just joining 2 colors in an interesting way. Sometimes I've seen it in the middle of like a triangular shawl pattern, and I just find this Kitchener stitch immensely useful. And thanks to Ruth for requesting that I do this in video form.